Several years ago, I started with an organization called For Tucson. It's a nonprofit Christian organization, and I was their education domain director. I worked closely with the church domain director. And when we first started, we wanted to see where was God already moving in the city. We don't want to create something and ask God to bless it, but we want to find out what God's already doing and say, Lord, how can we be a part of this? And what we saw were churches starting to look at schools and ask how that they can help and serve in schools.
80% of the public schools in the Tucson metro area have a church that has partnered with them, so it's the norm. And it's everything from practical needs to school makeovers, teachers' lounge makeovers, to tutoring, to mentoring, to it's whatever the church, whatever the school says is their need. That's then where we want to step in and see what we can do.
Most of our schools have been adopted by a church. And just like you're saying, where the churches are intentional about working with the administration, just blessing those teachers, doing work days on campus, being able to do after-school tutoring with the kids, churches are collaborating with public schools, and they're seeing a big difference.
I'm involved at our school across the street here from this church, and they have noticed it makes a difference. They have been very open and responsive. The superintendent here of the largest school district here in Tucson was actually inviting a group of pastors to meet with him about every other month just to hear from them and to dialogue with them. Got to pray for him, and those have been real significant happenings here.
For pastors and ministry leaders to say, schools, this is kind of uncharted waters for us, but we want to minister here. How can we do that? How can we do it legally and appropriately? How can we do it in a Christ-like manner? So we started building relationships with each of the school districts, both top down and bottom up. So we build relationships with the superintendent and then directors and people in places of leadership, but we also build connections with the local church and help them to make those connections. It's based on relationship, and with relationships it takes time to develop, but also when you do, you develop trust. So we realized with the church school partnerships that the church and the school hadn't engaged with one another for quite a while. So one of the things that we did is that we would do trainings because the school was skeptical of the church, thinking all they want to do was evangelize. And the church wasn't sure what the boundaries were and how do we do this. And some people were even under the impression just because we're Christian and we're on campus, that meant you were evangelizing, but that wasn't the case.
One of the things that we would often say to the church is the best way to preach an unconditional gospel is unconditionally. So don't put conditions on it. So you're not serving the school so that they'll advertise your vacation Bible school, or so that you get your name on the marquee, or so that you get praise and thanks and all that. You don't do it for any of those things. You do it unconditionally because that's how God loves us. And when you do that, the schools will often choose to put your name on the marquee. And they'll choose to thank you, and they'll choose to do all these other things. But that's up to them. You don't do it for that reason. It's got to be unconditional when you go in there.
What you're seeing is the unchurched being loved with no strings attached. They're not evangelizing. They're just loving them and just saying, we just wanted to care for you. It is really, really powerful.
Most of the schools, the teachers are supplying copy paper out of their own budget. Crayons, markers, Kleenex, tissues, hand sanitizer, all that kind of stuff. A lot of times the teachers are paying for that out of their own pockets. So if you say, well, what if we did a drive and we supplied that for the school? The school's going to be like, that would be amazing. And we can do that. This is easy stuff. A lot of it is low-hanging fruit. And when you get credibility at that kind of level, that we're here to make this a better neighborhood, we're here to make this a better place to live, then you've just opened up the door for the gospel in all kinds of ways.
So when we were meeting with one of the school districts, it was the superintendent and his cabinet, is what he called it, and his administrative team. One of the assistant superintendents was there, and we were talking about the church-school partnership and how can we, as a Christian community, serve your district. And the assistant superintendent had his hands folded the whole time and didn't like this conversation at all. And he spoke up at the end and said, I don't agree with these church-school partnerships. All the church wants to do is put pamphlets in our algebra books and get us into trouble. And that's what some of the administration, would think. And so when we serve unconditionally, we start building that trust and showing that we are trustworthy. And the interesting thing is that same assistant superintendent, a year or so later, came to us and said, how can we grow these partnerships? Because they have been so successful and they have so blessed the school district. And we were basically the community, Christian community, come together to serve, and at a time when nobody else was helping and nobody else was doing the school. So he came to us and had a whole different perspective once we were trustworthy and faithful in what we were doing and loving on the school unconditionally.
Public school superintendents, that's been a place that we've made enough of an impact with churches serving schools in a myriad of different ways that we have the respect of school superintendents, and they know the Christian community and recognize the Christian community as an asset to their work that they're doing. And then that opened up the door for the family services, child protective services, to say, would you adopt us too? And so we've got a tremendous relationship with Department of Child Safety here in the Pima County area. Tucson was the first city to use a program, Care Portal, west of the Mississippi. And now Care Portal is in, I think, 26 states throughout the nation. And it's a partnership between the Christian church and Department of Child Safety or Child Protective Services or whatever the government agency is that's called in that area, where caseworkers who are meeting these families that are in crisis will recognize a need. Sometimes it's as simple as grandma could be a kinship placement for these kids, except that grandma doesn't have a crib, or grandma's apartment has bed bugs and she doesn't have the funds to be able to take care of that. Or the family needs a minivan because they don't have an ability to transport the whole family and keep them together. Sometimes it's a material thing like that, but the government doesn't have the resources to meet that need. And oftentimes it's even simpler than that. So that request gets filled out by the caseworker anonymously. It's sent out to churches geographically, to the churches that are closest to where that family in crisis is. And then that family the church has the opportunity to say, we will pray for this, and if we can help, we'll meet the need. And when they first launched the program 5 years ago here in Pima County, to the Tucson area, their hope was that 50% of the needs would be met by the Christian church. And that was like shooting high. They were really hoping that 50% of the needs. To date, 77% of the needs that have been entered by these Department of Child Safety caseworkers have been met by the Christian church. And the caseworker rating, they evaluate their, just like everything else where you give 5 stars or whatever, 100% 5-star ratings. And it's now, I think the last number that I saw was something like 3,500 kids have been directly impacted by the Christian church in the Pima County area over the last 5 years at the invitation of the government. So the government is inviting the church to be the church and care for families in crisis right in the neighborhood of their church. And we have the opportunity to do what we're good at doing, which is loving on people and caring for them and praying for them, meeting practical needs. Just opened up the door for the gospel in all kinds of ways.